And also that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 8 English lesson on adverbs. And before we start, you're going to log on, and we're not going to aplusstudents.ca. We are basically just going to um, look at the whiteboard and then basically just converse based on what adverbs are. So adverbs, right? Our chapter is adverbs. Our subject is English Language Arts, grade 8. Right? And we are basically going to find out what adverbs are, and we're going to find out the differences between the different types of adverbs that we have. Right? All right, so we have adverbs, right? So adverbs or an adverb, it is a word that either modifies or it describes a verb. It modifies or describes an adjective. And we can either say it modifies or describes another adverb, right? So those are adverbs. And adverbs, they can change or add details to the meaning of these words within a sentence, right? Or in sentences. And when it comes to adverbs, right? Adverbs, they often end in ly, but not always. And we are going to find out the adverbs that basically end in ly and why, right? So it's basically adverbs that tells us how. So the adverbs that tells us how, that is the adverbs that basically ends in ly. So often adverbs that end in ly, but not always, right? And if we look at an example of an adverb that ends in ly, it is where it says he ate his breakfast quickly. He ate his breakfast quickly. And if we identify the adverb within that sentence, it is quickly. Right? And remember, we said that an adverb, it either tells us more about the verb, an adjective, or another adverb, right? And in this case, right, quickly, it tells us how he ate his breakfast, right? So ate being the verb. So ate being the verb, and then quickly, that tells us how he ate his breakfast. So quickly is our adverb, and then ate is our verb. All right. So then we have, once again, right? Remember we said an adverb, it tells us more or describes it describes a verb, it describes an adjective, or it describes another adverb, right? That is basically adjectives. And we just made one example of a sentence where we said that he ate his breakfast quickly, right? So the word quickly is an adverb and it tells us how. So basically, how did he eat his breakfast? He ate his breakfast quickly, right? Another word can maybe be ate his breakfast hurriedly, right? So hurriedly can also be an adverb. It basically tells us how he did something, right? If he maybe did something, if somebody did something and they were confused, we can then maybe also say confusedly. That is how someone did something confusedly, happily, sadly, right? So the words that ends in ly, right? It is basically adverbs that basically tells us how. And we are basically going to find out what the different types of adverbs are, right? We're going to find out what the different types of adverbs are. And once again, adverbs are words that modifies or describes a verb. It modifies or describes an adjective, and it modifies and describes another adverb. And adverbs, they can either change or add details to the meaning of these words or sentences. So now we're going to find out about the different types of sentences, right? Starting with adverbs, it tells us how, right? Because remember, we have adverb of time, right? And so on. And we're going to find out more about the different types of adverbs. So for those of you who joined, I'd just like to apologize. We are having a few technical issues, so we cannot seem to log on to aplusstudents.ca. So we basically just gonna work from the whiteboard. So I really hope that you'll be able to see on the screen, but we won't be able to go to aplusstudents.ca. All right, so then we have different types of adverbs, right? We have adverb of time. I'm gonna put here adverb dot dot of time. Let's start with time. So we have adverb of time, right? And adverbs of time, right? It basically tells us words like, it gives us words like ago, before, um, yesterday, soon, never, lately, right? That is a few words of adverbs of time, right? And an example of an adverb of time is where I say, let me think, since we must have used the word before. I have heard this before, right? So which means that before is our adverb, right? And heard is our verb. So this is basically adverb of time. And we said adverbs of time can be words such as before, it can be ago, can be never, yesterday, soon, right? It can either be lately or later. That is basically words that tells us more, or more like it's basically adverbs of time. Then we also have adverb of manner, right? I'm going to put here manner only. An adverb of manner, right? This is basically the adverb that tells us how. The adverb of manner, it is basically that adverb that tells us how, and it basically ends in ly. Right? So adverb of manner, it's the adverb that ends in ly and it tells us how. So, for example, we have words like slowly, badly, quickly, hurriedly, um, quietly, beautifully, dignifiedly, delightfully, loudly, right? Those are words that basically ends in ly. It's words that ends in ly, and it's an adverb of manner. They tell us how something happens. It can either be slowly, can be badly, beautifully, delightfully, loudly, right? And if we look at an example, right, sentence example, we can say, the soldiers fought bravely. So the soldiers fought bravely. So which means that bravely is our adverb, right? So bravely is our adverb and it tells us how the soldiers fought. Then we also have the adverb of place. We have adverb of place. An adverb of place, it basically tells us where something is, where something is taking place, where something is going, right? Where something is happening. And the adverb of place can be words like here, it can be words like there, near, far. It can be words like everywhere, nearby, it can be away, backwards, upwards. Those are words that basically tells us it's adverb of place. It tells us where. And if we look at an example of adverb of place, right? We can say I've lived here for about 2 years. And if we look at if we identify our adverb within the sentence, it is year. So I've lived here for about 2 years, right? And that is adverb of place. And that basically tells us where, right? It tells us where. It can be here, can be there, it can be everywhere, it can be upwards, downwards, backwards, right? They basically tell us where. And then we have the adverb of frequency. Adverb of frequency. And the adverb of frequency, see, right? It is words like always, usually, normally, often, sometimes, occasionally, and once, right? That is adverbs of frequency. It can basically tell us how frequent something happens, right? And it's words, for example, like we say, always, usually, normally, often, sometimes, occasionally, once, twice, and so on. Those are adverbs of frequency. And an example of an adverb of frequency, we can say, I occasionally. I occasionally. I can say, I occasionally drink Coca-Cola. So our word that is our adverb, right? It is occasionally. So these are basically our adverbs, right? And we have our different types of adverbs. It can be adverb of time, it can be adverb of manner, adverb of place, adverb of frequency, right? And then we also made a few examples of adverbs, or basically adverbs within a sentence we have identified, right? So keeping in mind, we have adverb of time, adverb of manner, place, as well as frequency. So basically, okay, let me remove that. Okay, so adverbs basically they describing either how, when, or where, or what extent something occurs, and that basically is the same as saying it is adverb of time, adverb of manner, frequency, and place, right? So adverbs we can say that they describe. I'm gonna write it here. Adverbs describe how something happens, when it happens, for example, where it happens, and even to what extent. Right? So that is basically what adverbs are. Adverbs, they describe how, when, where, and to what extent something occurs. And like I say, it is basically the same as saying adverb of manner, adverb of time, frequency, and place, right? Because place tells us where, manner tells us how, right? And adverbs that tell us how, they end in ly. So adverbs that tell us why, they end in ly, like hurriedly, quickly, right? Those are words, for example, that ends in ly, and they tell us how, right? So the adverbs that tell us how, they usually end in ly. All right. So we mentioned adverbs that describe how, when, where, and to what extent, right? So basically, if we were to match, let's say, the adverbs that describe how, when, where, and to what extent, then we can say adverbs of manner, right? It describes how an action is performed or how something happens. So which means that manner, it links with how. So manner tells us how, right? Then we have adverb of place, right? And we see that adverb of place, it provides information about the location of the action. So the location of the action. So where is the action taking place? And there we can also link the adverb of that tells us where to the adverb of place. It can tell us the position, the distance, as well as the direction. Right? And we see it mainly with adverbs, right? Especially adverb that tells us how, right? They basically end in ly. quickly, occasionally, confusingly, hurriedly, happily, right? That is but a few examples of words that are adverbs of manner that tells us how. All right. And then we also have adverb of time, right? And we said adverb of time, it basically tells us also, it describes when something happens. So when did it happen, right? It happened yesterday. It happened some time ago. It happened today. It happened tomorrow, right? That is adverbs. It tells us when. And then we have adverb of frequency. It describes how often something happens, right? It tells us how often something happens, and how often something happens. It can be divided into two categories based on how specific they are. But for now, we're just going to stick to how often something happens. All right. And if we look at a few examples, I feel like I need to write down a few examples of the different types of adverbs, right? So we have adverb of manner. I'm going to put your adverb of manner. And if we look at a few words, or let's say examples of adverbs of manner, we can use words like, I've been mentioning this word quickly. I've been mentioning another word which was occasionally, sadly, right? It basically just ends in ly. Keenly, it's like where you're keen to do something. Rapidly can also be like quickly and eventually, right? So these are adverbs of manner. Then we go to adverbs of time. An adverb of time, right? We see that as the name suggests, the adverbs of time, it used to tell the reader when an action is occurring, right? Tells us time periods when something occurs. It doesn't have to be 9 o'clock. It's not saying 8 o'clock. It's not saying 7 o'clock, right? And then we have adverbs of time. We said it basically tells us where something happened or where the action is being mentioned, right? And we can use words, for example, like year, outside, whenever, and wherever. We can even use words like elsewhere, left, go left, go right, right? Whenever and wherever. Right? So those are adverbs of time and it tells us when. All right, and then we have adverb of frequency. An adverb of frequency, these adverbs are used to denote how often an action or event is happening. All right, and then we have adverb of frequency, and the adverb of frequency are mainly words such as extreme, too, much, more, most. Sorry, it can be rarely, never, often, weekly, monthly, annually, usually, sometimes, occasionally, right? And constantly. So we see that adverb of frequency, right? We have words like rarely, never, often, weekly, monthly, gradually, annually, usually, sometimes, occasionally, constantly, frequently, right? That is the adverb of frequency. And we see with adverbs, right, it will basically still tell us how, tell us when, tell us where. All right. So now we are going to, if we look at adverbs and our different types of adverbs, right? Remember, we see that the adverbs, it basically describes a noun, a verb, sorry. It basically modifies a verb, and it even tells us more about an adverb as well as another adjective, or an adjective and another adverb. Right? And these are but a few examples of our different types of adverbs. And we see that the adverbs of manner, it is like quickly, occasionally, sadly, keenly. It's supposed to be keenly, rapidly, eventually, right? It will subside. All right. And if we look at the different types of adverbs, right, and we look at sentences, let us go and create sentences. All right. All right, so now we're going to look at a few examples that I'm going to type out and you're going to identify what the adverbs are. Right? Let's start with the first one. So you will tell me either what type of adverb it is or you can just identify the adverb. All right, we'll say she'll be home soon. Right? So think about the answer. All right, so if we look at these, let's look for two more before we continue. She dresses, we can say she dresses beautifully. And let's look one more and then we're going to identify our adverbs. All right, so now we have our 5 examples of different sentences of the different types of adverbs, right? The first one is she'll be home soon. What type of adverb do you think this is? She'll be home soon. So we need to say what type of adverb it is. You can either, for example, say it tells us how, when, where, or you can say the type of sentence it is. All right. So basically, if we look at the first one, then we can say that one is it basically tells us when are you gonna be home soon, right? I'm going to be soon. So when are you gonna be home soon, right? So our answer is soon. Our adverb is soon. Then it says, is that your scarf there? So is that your scarf there? We need to say what type of adverb it is. All right, and if we say, is that your scarf there? Right, which means that there, which tells us where, right? So there, and that is an adverb that tells us where. I have never heard this before. I have never heard this before. We need to say what type of adverb it is. I've never heard this before. All right, so basically our answer is going to be before, and before we go on to that one, and then she dresses beautifully. Beautifully. How does she dress? Beautifully. And then we say she dresses beautifully. So beautifully, it tells us how she dresses, right? And then I occasionally eat junk food. It's not every day, but occasionally. So I occasionally eat junk food. And if we look at what the adverb is within that sentence, all right. And then it says, I occasionally eat junk food, right? So if we identify our adverb in there, we can say it's occasionally, right? So it's like asking somebody, how often do you? And they immediately say, I occasionally. Right? And these are basically different types of adverbs. And we said adverbs are words that either describes the verb, or it tells us more about the verb, right? Or it tells us more or describes the verb with the adjective or. All right, so we said she'll be home soon. So basically, every soon is our. And then it's hot. Is that your scarf? Sorry, there. And yes, right? So basically, the word soon, if we look at the word soon, then that is basically adverb of time. There, right? That is adverb of place. It tells us where. I've never heard this before. That is also adverb of time. And then she dresses beautifully, and beautifully being the adverb of manner. And remember, that is the adverb that tells us how. And then I occasionally eat junk food. And we can also say that is adverb of manner. How to do it, where to do it, right? But occasionally I eat junk food. All right. So basically, that is adverbs. We said adverbs is a word that modifies or describes a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. Adverbs can also change or add details to the meaning of these words or sentences. And adverbs that often end either in ly, but not always, right? It's basically the adverbs that end in ly is adverb of manner, and that is adverbs that tells us how. So adverbs that end in ly, but not always. For example, he ate his breakfast quickly. All right. So that is now the end of our lesson on adverbs. And we said adverbs, it's a word that modifies and describes a verb, adjective, and another adverb, right? And it often ends in ly, but that is basically adverbs. It tells us how, which is the adverb of manner. All right. So this is the end of our lessons, grade 8. Thank you very much for joining our class. Once again, I want to apologize for the technical issue that we are experiencing, right? You need to have a good evening further. Goodbye. All right.